And the guys that got Sequoia and all these guys that got into it, it's not luck.
Right.
They could see through corners. They knew the next source of value in this world, the next asset class that would be the most highly prized was data. We were moving out of oil and into data. And they understood that before the solutions were packaged.
Hmm.
So if we understand nature as much as we can now, we will understand it that when those solutions are packaged, we will understand what they stand for, what they mean, and we can start to invest in, and we can start to back them. And so there will be hundreds of thousands of AI enhanced young entrepreneurs who will understand that a plant can yield 17 products if it's looked after properly, instead of it being a one commodity crop and a monocrop.
Right.
And that 1 hectare can yield 20 times more revenue if it's farmed in a different way than the way it is right now. And it has all of the advantages of, we have the speed of understanding. We don't have to go to a library or to a university and seek out the knowledge that exists in one book or in one lecturer's head. We have a mobile phone and we have every piece of data and knowledge at our hands at any one time. So the acceleration that we can make towards nature being the asset is so fast. I think that the wealthiest people in the world will be the people that are involved in food and water.
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Jeremy McKane, and I'm the president, founder, CEO, also founder of something called Ultramarine that we host every year in the British Virgin Islands on Necker Island. But I thought it would be really awesome to bring in just an amazing human being, Matt Ross. Matt, you and I we originally met through our dear friend Dr. Ralph Shami in London. uh, you and I have had amazing, great conversations ever since. And I thought, well, how cool would it be for us to just to hop on a video and just rap? And now you're not even in the U.S. I'm in Texas. You're in Indonesia right now. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Tell us a
Like
little bit
mid-
about yourself, for the audience to really understand the perspective of who you are, and we'll dive deeper into some of these things.
okay. So originally I'm from London. So I grew up in London. I went to medical school, and I didn't get into that. I didn't like that. And then went. I saw it was a great business, but ethically, I couldn't hang with that. And then so I went to law school because I've always been very binary. So the idea of debating the grey area sounded horrible. So I thought that would challenge me, and it did. And I then realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. And then I was offered lots of money and sold my soul and went and worked at Goldman Sachs and became an investment banker for 10, 11 years. And after 10, 11 years, I realized that I had all the things I was told would make me happy. I had all the things that I was told I needed to have. But still inside me, there was this hole, and it wasn't getting any smaller. And I had thrown everything into it. I had the watches and the flights and the house, and I had everything. But still, there was this. There has to be more. And and one day, I had an experience when I was in Japan. I went to the best restaurant in the world. I had a meal which was food, but it transcended food. It was poetry. It was colors. It was a symphony. It was something outside of what it appeared to be, and it blew me away. And at the end, I had a Lavazza coffee, and that kind of burst my bubble. And I thought, why is there a coffee not as good as this
Mm.
food? So, and in that moment of curiosity, only a few weeks after saying to myself, there must be more, which instigated it. I thought, I will make the coffee that deserves to be at the end of this meal. I'll make a 3-star Michelin coffee. It doesn't look like there's going to be, it doesn't look like there is one. And so at least there'll be one customer, and that would be me. So that was the first time kind of in it, like little Matt had come out for a long time. He was like, that sounds playful. Let's do that. That sounds like fun. So I didn't know anything about coffee, and that was cool as well. So if I fast forward a couple of years, I left banking. I sold up everything. I moved out of my apartment in Happy Valley in Hong Kong. I gave up. I sold my watches, my art, just everything, and I went and moved to a very small post-tsunami house in Banda Aceh. So my rent went from like $8,000 a month to $8 a month, and I lived on $100 a month to be a coffee farmer because I had an experience in the Arizona desert, a very well-known place. I saw a
Hmm.
sunrise. My heart said to me, "You know what you have to do," and and I promised myself in my early 20s when I'd ignored my heart, like the inner feeling. I ignored it. My head took over, and and I said, right, next time I have that feeling, I'm going to follow it. And so I called up the bank and said, I'm not coming back. I'm going to go and be a farmer. And I set out to go and make a coffee that existed in my head, but didn't exist in the real world.
But how does that go when the bank is like, you're gonna be a what?
Yeah, so they didn't believe me, and they sued me, which was which actually was really nice. It was really nice actually because there's always lingering doubts when you leave a relationship. You always look back on it and think, but it was good and there was all these good things, and then they go and do something like that, and it's the last thread that gets severed, and it's like, thank you for doing that. You have really made it clear for me that this is not what I want to be doing.
Mm.
So I set off to go make this coffee, having not seen a coffee plant, not speaking Bahasa Indonesia, and I wanted to represent the country. But at that time, I had a mindset where I was like multiverse. I didn't know I couldn't have anything. I was brought up without very much money, but I was brought up with a mindset that if I wanted something enough, I could get it.
Yeah.
And so I got all the things I wanted. I didn't know I couldn't have what I wanted. So I decided I wanted to have a Michelin star coffee, be the first private label in Harrods in London, and I wanted to represent Indonesia. They were my whys, they were my goals, they were enormous, and but not knowing any of those things, because I know that the great master does all the admin. I just have to focus on the destination and the vision. And then 4 years later, I achieved all those things, and that was an amazing experience. In its singularity, it was an amazing experience because I achieved a certain goal and I achieved certain things. But what happened when I was there was the revelation. I was born a white Western privileged male in Europe with like all the head starts you can have, and I am a consumer, and I believe that co-ops are great, and that fair trade's great, and organic's great, and I pay a premium because I think the farmers are being helped and everything. And then when I go and live on $100 a month and become a farmer, I realize that's not quite true, and I live behind the veil. I live behind the veil of Western consumerism, and I see what the truth is like the other side, and I was a bit shocked. So a couple of things happened for me. The first thing was the shock that reality wasn't quite the way it was, and the second thing was that that the people there were amazing, and their operating systems were so different to mine. So I realized I had to unlearn almost everything,
Hmm.
relearn different ways. I've been brought up in captivity, and I was in a village where they were all brought up in the wild. So I've been brought out of the zoo and chucked into the wild, and I'm around all these wild animals. I'm like, I don't know, no one's hand feeding me a bonus every 3 months now,
Yeah.
and I don't turn up, and there's no one giving me great soup and meals, and I got to fend for myself, and it was a real culture shock. Um, but it was an amazing lesson, an amazing learn, and it led to many many other things. But that's why I'm in Indonesia. That's the
Yeah.
beginning of the journey.
Well, I think it's fascinating because you basically it started because of coffee. I mean, you were like, well, I'm having this amazing experience, but not this. But you touched on the fact that you got sued. I'm curious, like, what was the basis of this lawsuit? I mean,
Because if I wasn't there, they were going to lose money, and they didn't believe me.
oh, okay.
You're going to not go to another bank and make millions, and actually you go and be a coffee farmer on $100. We don't believe
They
you.
probably don't get that every day.
No, they don't get that every day, and I totally understand their distrust in that because it's quite a distrustful industry.
Yeah.
So yeah, fair enough. That's absolutely fine. It's all part of the game. That's the game that they play and still is played. And I know the rules of those games, and so that's fine.
Well, so I think what's interesting is that you and I both have a lot of times have many discussions about, I mean, our on the side that we're focused on, we're looking at, how do you unlock these types of things and make sure that, there's inclusivity and capacity and all these kinds of things. And then you're coming from the other side of things where you've actually been in the banking industry. Now you're a coffee farmer. And, I think one of the things you even told me in past conversations was, the way that coffee is grown, it's done in monoculture. And you also have addressed that particular issue as well. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Which part? Okay, let's go for the big one. I think that coffee is. Let's just go straight to the top. Okay. I believe that coffee is the philosopher's stone. I really don't believe that anyone truly understands what coffee is. The coffee we have today is not the coffee that started coffee. Like most
Explain what you
things.
mean there.
Okay, so like most things when humans find them in the first place, like the original foie gras was because the migrating birds would gorge themselves for the flight. But then, because the foie gras tasted so good, they created gavage, and gavage would then increase it. You would industrialize something that was great. We could make money out of it, and humans need scale.
Yeah.
But the moment that humans become involved, and the moment that happens, you lose virtue. So the original coffee beans would have been wild coffee beans, and they would have been grown in amazingly wild, pristine environments. They would have, and they're plants that choose to grow where they are. Now, this is a conscious selection. Their plants are all vessels of expression of the land, and we know that most from wine. Most people know which their favorite wine is, or even where their favorite Pinot is from. It might be from a country, it might be from a region, it might be from a single vineyard. And the reason we know that is because in white countries, we have the ability to educate because we have plants that grow there. So the variation that exists in wine exists in every single plant. One of the
Wow.
travesties of modern day is that food is a commodity. It,
Hmm.
it isn't. Food tastes different from wherever it's from, but we homogenized it, we commoditized it to get scale. We put it into long straight rows. We monocultured it. Plants plants don't go in straight lines. Nothing does. Nothing in nature that grows in a straight line. A straight line is an indication that we've interrupted natural flow, and that the energetics of a system are being interrupted by the linear system that we've imposed on it.
Hmm.
And and so the coffee farms that we would find would be pristine farms, very high up in the mountains, and they were farms that no one really went to because they were off grid. They were a long way away, um, and they these places are the most remote, the poorest, but yet the wealthiest as well because the land they have, the produce they have, is just unbelievable. Um, so with regards to coffee, when you look at a coffee farm and you see long straight rows, you see the linearity of our kind of extractive, linear mindset that the world has at the moment when it comes to food and it comes to the industrialization. Modernization has been amazing on so many accounts, but it's also induced individualization. And so I went from living in metropolis cities where I very much live a singular life to then going into very small communities where everyone knew everyone, everyone looked after everyone, and it felt like family,
Mm,
extended family. And
sure.
culture, there's a culture that loves culture here. The Nebula family is celebrated, and communities are celebrated, and the land is celebrated, um, where it still can be. And Indonesia is one of those examples. You can't aggregate Indonesia.
Hmm.
There's 790 languages, 3 time zones. It is a decentralized mass. It's like a mycelial network more than it is a country.
Wow, that's a really great way to kind of describe it, and I think the way that you've put all of this together is to me it's just super fascinating because when you look at all of your experiences, it's almost like this is your opus. This is what has come together. This is your life's work, right? And it shows in your passion, and it shows like the work that you do. A lot of people talk about things, and you're actually physically doing it. And I feel like you have, because of this, you also have really kind of bestowed on us some gems when it comes to the nature markets. I mean, I've been kind of dorking around with nature markets conversations for a good 3+ years. You've been around for much longer on this, and our dear friend Ralph as well. But some recent publications that you've put out there talking about kind of, I don't know, is it fair to call it the great repricing, or I think at one point I had read, it said it was natural capital's silent takeover of global finance. Can you explain, if we're just walking into this conversation now, like we've got a good picture of who you are, where you came from, and really what you started to build in Indonesia, which I think has given you this path of enlightenment. Maybe
Mm.
I would love to have you explain, the nature markets, why they're important, and what we have to lose if we do it wrong.
Um, so I just had a conversation with somebody, and I use this analogy, and it's quite an interesting one. Um, I feel like humanity is ignoring all of the health signs as we slowly get sicker and immobilized and iller. So I'll give you an example. There is a natural honey that works really well for diabetic foot. And when people have diabetes, they have diabetes because of a lifestyle choice. Then they get it, and they'll either do something about it or it'll carry on. And it will carry on, and they'll probably they'll probably gain some weight. Then it'll get to the point where their health starts to suffer. Then they might get peripheral neuropathy. Then they might not be able to feel their feet. And then they'll have a diabetic foot ulcer. And then they might lose a toe from gangrene. And at each stage of this, it still hasn't become serious enough
Hmm.
for them to change the underlying issue, which is what is occurring in the first place. And so I find that it's only when someone's confronted with losing a limb that they develop the level of seriousness which is required for change. If we look at nature at the moment, and we look at carbon, and we look at climate and stuff, it's it's like it's like asking someone it's like asking someone who overeats to stop eating two things. Yeah. There's something deeper within, which is the bigger problem, which is manifesting with all of these outward outputs.
Yeah.
So if you stop eating hot dogs, you're not going to lose weight. You just stop eating hot dogs. So with nature, I feel like we have slowly acclimatized to processed food. We have become okay with kids not knowing what vegetables look like.
Hmm.
We've become with not interacting with nature very much, and over time we've become addicted to sweetness, and we have detached ourselves from the intrinsic part of nature of who we are, and we don't know any different because it's been going on for so long.
Right.
Like for 70 years, we've only been using three elements in our fertilizer, NPK, where the soil needs every letter in the alphabet.
Tell me what that is. I don't know what that is.
So NPK is the main fertilizer that governments have been handing out. It's like phosphate, nitrogen,
Okay, got it.
and that's good, but it depletes the soil. It's short. It's like a company cannibalizing itself for short-term returns, but in the end, it's underlying capital. It's using that just to kind of stay alive.
I see.
When we talk about sustainability, for me, it feels like we know the system's broken. How long can we sustain it before it breaks? How long can we keep patching this up and keep giving it prescriptions before? Because we're unaware of the wound. The wound is so huge, so significant, and we're also We're also very hampered by democratic cycles of 3 and 4 year changes of presidencies, changes of policies. We don't have a long-term outlook on the way that we can make a big difference. So, with nature at the moment, I feel that we have completely lost our part in it. We see it from the outside. We see it as an infinite resource, always there for us to take.
Mm.
But it doesn't work like that. We don't have many fish left. We've polluted all of our rivers, and then it gets to the point where it's too late. And I feel like we're at the point now where we've just been given a diagnosis, like in a few years you're going to lose a leg if you don't change what you're doing. And so for me,
yeah.
yeah.
No. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, sustainability is one question, and that is, does the farmer's child want to be a farmer? That's it. From all of my experiences, whenever I speak to a farmer and I speak to his kids, anyone over 3 isn't really interested. Anyone under 3 is kind of looking at me because I'm white and a bit strange and a bit crazy. But the rest, they've got tablets. They see their parents are impoverished. They don't want that life.
Mm.
It's not a rewarding life. A $5 Starbucks in America, the farmer will get 5 cents. They don't get rewarded, and the kids are leaving the villages. So, for example, in Indonesia, we have 40 million farmers, but only 13% are under 35.
Wow.
So that is an inverted population pyramid, and that means that we will, in 40 years, not have any farmers. And that is such a huge
that's huge.
crisis. It's such a huge crisis, and I don't want to. I'm not here, I'm not here to judge, and I'm not here to say that anyone's doing any bad work or anything like that. But there are other things that are important, and I think
but there's a real problem.
I think we'll all starve before we boil to death. I think we'll all starve before the temperature gets too hot. The BPS, which is the national statistics in Indonesia, said that in the 2063 census, the smallholder farmer job title won't be on the form.
Wow.
And that has implications to everyone.
Yeah.
And the other part of nature is that we are all completely implicitly entangled with each other. Now, America is a developed nation. England is a developed nation. Hong Kong, Singapore, these are regarded as highly advanced, highly developed nations. However, if there are any problems, those countries can't feed themselves. They're dependent on food imports from countries which they call developing nations. And in those developing nations, the people that are growing the food are leaving to replicate the developed nations. And so our food security is our national security. And our interdependence on all of our decisions, the cause and effect of all of our decisions at all times, we have to take back our personal responsibility and our collective responsibility if we're gonna change this. It's up to us.
In line with changing this, I know that you're a person that always looks for solutions. So you said something a little bit earlier. You said, we're looking at nature from the outside, and I guess my question would be, if the adverse is, if we're looking at the outside, then how do we get people to look at nature from the inside? If we are at risk right now of losing a limb, you've got our attention. Where do we go from here, Matt?
Okay, so if we look at it from the inside, then we have to, and we look at it with a sense of responsibility. We realize that the most important thing we can do every single day is use our money and our actions, because they're the things that cause the chart of history. So whenever we pick up a fork and we put it into our plate, we're putting it into the problem or the solution. That's just happening. When I see a world where instead of buying food, you're voting for an ecosystem that you believe in, and the impact that you have by buying a product has a direct implication across multiple people in multiple countries, and ignorance is no longer tolerable. You can't just innocently have a chocolate bar without realizing that the Congo lost 40% of its rainforest because of cacao in the last 30 years. And Indonesia is not a bad country because of palm oil. People are growing it because it's a substitute for food and bio oils. And where does it all end? It all ends at the consumer. It's all up to the people that are buying it. It's all up to the power holders. If the forks changed plates or changed directions, you would have a shift in balance of payments in countries within days. You could bankrupt multinationals. That is the power that the collective have when they understand that that's it. So coming from within nature would be, okay, where does my food come from? If I'm going to buy this, where does it come from? I can't just choose it based on price. I have to think about where this comes from and understand it. And then the other thing is to reintegrate yourself with nature, to relearn it, to re-understand it, spend more time in it, because it's the greatest healer. Take your shoes off and stand on the ground. I know it sounds hippie, but it really does. I'm going to say hug a tree, hold a tree, feel it. There is a power. There's these machines you can clip onto a plant and it plays the music of the plant.
I've seen that before. Yeah, of course.
They're amazing. Everything's harmonic. Everything's beautiful. We're an intrinsic part of it. And our birthright was abundance. We came here, and where nature gave us everything that we ever needed. Somehow we have created a false illusion of scarcity, where we don't think we have enough, but we always have more than enough.
Right.
Always. I'll give you an example, right? In the Sahara, sometimes there's enormous rains. And after there's an enormous rain, there's flowers and grasses. And then birds start to turn up and things like this. And the reason is that whilst the same in the Great Plains with the buffaloes, there were 60 million buffaloes in 1850, and then they went down to 5,000 in 1910 or something. And in 1937, there was the Great Dust Bowl. Now, the 60 million bison or the buffalo, they used to move the land. Their hooves would till the soil. The rain and the nutrients would come from the poop and then get bison grass, and there'd be prairie chickens, and there'd be turkeys, and there'd be straw grass, and there'd be wildflowers, because the keystone species is so important. And then to the indigenous tribes, the Intertribal Buffalo Council, when they lose the buffalo, they lose their family. We are all here for a reason. We're all connected. We're all part of the same thing. We're not divided. We're not separate to nature. We're not separate by color or race or creed. We're all beautiful divine expressions, and we all came here for a reason. And maybe we all came here for a reason at this time right now, because it's so important. Maybe that might be amazing if you look at it like that.
Well, I mean, Dr. Sylvia Earle often says that we are the first humans to ever walk the surface of the planet to know what the problem is and to know what to do about the problem. Our previous ancestors didn't have that capability. They didn't have the situational awareness nor the impetus to change the way things could potentially be the outcome. And I know that you and I work closely with Dr. Ralph Shami, and Ralph has really kind of shown me a lot of things on what I think is collectively referred to as the nature-based economy. But I think that also has some caveats as well. And I'm curious, could this be the solution to some of these problems? I've often looked at saying, well, if we look at nature positive movements or we look at the markets coming to nature, that this is meeting people where they understand. And the reason why I say this is because several years ago, I was fortunate enough to be invited to COP21, the Paris Agreement in Paris. And just briefly, I happened to meet Dr. Jane Goodall, and she had said, not everybody can be a conservationist. Not everybody can care about the planet. Because if you're trying to spend your entire day to put food on the table, to feed your kids, to go to work, to get the money to feed your kids, to ride a bus, whatever, you're in survival mode. Solve the issue of poverty, and you will solve the issue of conservation. And my heart thinks that maybe having a way of saying, look, today you might be extracting bodies from the ocean, because I'm an ocean person. You might be fishing and having an extractive business, but maybe in the future you're extracting data from the ocean. I mean, from a economic banking background, I feel like, and you also have the farming background. Is this a viable solution? I mean, I feel like the answer is yes, but I would love to know from you, as we would say in Texas, where are the scorpions in the deal? Like, where should we not put our foot, right? Because we don't want to get stung.
Okay, I think of it on the very most basic level. I think that if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then we understand that there are only three things that we need. Everything else is superfluous. If Uber stopped tomorrow, we'd work out another way we did before.
True.
If cars stopped working, we'd work out another way. It'd be fine. If WhatsApp broke down or whatever, we'd work out a way. But
I love how you went from Uber to cars to WhatsApp,
yeah,
which is an equally valuable thing for most people in international communities.
yeah, it's just like transportation and communication. We work out another way because we can do it. We're quite
Of
adaptive. That's
course.
fine. But without 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 food and water, 72 hours later, the species collapses. So if the food stops in Manhattan, that really doesn't matter how expensive your apartment is. You're not going to be there. And if you are there, it's going to be blood. Right? We cannot survive without those things. They are the truest form of asset value there is. They're the original store of wealth. We have moved on from those. The company that understood that last time was the East India Company, and they would still be the wealthiest company in the world. At that time, people understood the value of food. Food was, as Hippocrates said, medicine. People understood the value of food, and they understood everything it could do. And then, but this was food of virtue. We then start scaling and industrializing, and then food becomes different. And then we start to place value in other things, and we start to create paper money as a means of energy exchange, and we start to create all these different other asset values, and we go from oil, we go from gold to oil, we go to data. The value moves on, it moves on, but we're going further and further away from that. Whilst we're going to different value stores, we're destroying the only one that we actually need. And the issue with destroying food as a value is that I looked at the chart recently of OpenAI's growth against Grok's growth. And Grok's growth was unbelievably fast and amazing, and you can have that much growth that quick. And obviously you've got Moore's law, and you have all these things. In the time it took Grok to go from an idea to go to being as good as OpenAI, you would have a 3 foot seedling, right? Maybe a 4 foot seedling. You need 7 years for a cacao plant. Cacao tripled in value this year because there was a disease in one part of the world. It's the canary in the mine. If you look at the Bitcoin chart, in 2017, it went from 1,000, 3,000. It was going for like about 10 years. It blipped to 10,000. Then it started to consolidate around 10 to 5. And then it went to 20 to 30 to 100,000. We're all patterns replicate. Every chart's the same. There's always the three-wave sequence. There's always the J curve. There's always the early signals. And the problem with tech and with manufacturing, it's very quick. You can't rush nature. You cannot get a new coffee tree under 5 years. You can't get a new coconut tree under 5. You can't get a new apple tree under 9. But the problem is where they grow, the people are leaving. So you have the macro incidents that the actual people that are growing are leaving, and the time it takes to bring new supply online is 10 years away. So the moment we realize we've got a problem, we're at least 10 years away from the solution. So if you see cacao trading at $11,000 a ton at the moment, it might be trading $50,000 a ton in 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Because we need it. We need it. We can't upcycle and hydrogenate palm oil and add colorings to make a chocolate. There's only cacao. You know, the cacao bean was a deity to the Incas. The Yucatan Peninsula, it's a master plant. The ceremonial cacao ceremonies. It's one of the most important plants in the world, and yet there's so much fragility around the current system. It's just that at the moment, it's my one example because it tripled in a year.
Yeah, sure.
And it's not on its own. They'll all do that. There's more people that have got more money, that want better food. There's less people growing the food, and therefore you have the most basic elements of economics, where you have more demand than supply. You have a macro shortage of supply. You have a massive 12% CAGR on healthy foods, and you have the basic needs that we need it to live. We don't need any other things to live.
But
it needs to find a value.
Yeah, exactly. But you've also kind of defined this in previous kind of writings as the great repricing. Can you kind of explain to the audience, what's involved in that? Because I feel like this leads into that.
Yeah, the great repricing is how exposed are we to this undervalued, underpriced risk. I did a piece that got a lot of attention on LinkedIn, on Substack, and it was a report by Norges Bank, who's the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund in charge of the pensions and stuff. Now, the common theme in the market was a PwC quote. Some people will say it was different, but on average, most people said it was around 55% of global GDP depended on nature. But then in late 2024, Norges Bank got 519 companies to stress test 96% of their portfolio, which is 1.6 trillion. So 1.33 trillion was stress tested against nature, and they realized that they were exposed. And they had underwritten the risk of climate and macroeconomic factors as to how that would impact their business. And so they were the first people that they haven't waited for regulation. They haven't waited for a top-down governance system to say that, no, this is the new way we're going to do things. These are the new rules. These are very forward-thinking, visionary people that have a great responsibility to a whole country's pension fund. to look forward and say we we are aware there is a problem and we're going to act on it. And at 96%, that's highly conclusive. I recommend. I recommend looking into that piece that I wrote, reading a bit more detail about it. It's really interesting. It's exposure. It's exposure to coastal erosion from enormous amounts of mangroves being lost. When you lose mangroves, you lose fish. You have soil erosion. You have shifting sand patterns. You don't have crabs. You don't have sea cucumbers. It starts there at the coastal region. When you have enormous monocropped plantations of palm oil that use glyphosate, you have surface runoff that goes into rivers. The rivers go into, and you have zitramide that goes into rivers. It goes into the sea. It kills the coral reefs. And each one of these actions has an implication. That only modern science believes that anything can happen in isolation. For example, a vitamin C tablet is the emperor's new clothes, right?
Mm.
If you have a vitamin C tablet, you will urinate the whole thing up. You must have a B vitamin complex with it because it's a coenzyme. Nature developed a fruit because it's the symphony of everything together that makes one thing work. You can't think. We love to isolate, and we have a very reductionist way of looking at things. We must think it comes down to this one thing. There isn't one single thing in nature. The only one thing in nature is nature, and so that's a lot to unlearn.
It is, and I mean, I think there are a lot of people that probably would definitely agree with that. I guess if this, I mean, it sounds like you feel like this great repricing is inevitable. I guess, and maybe some of the asymmetric kind of positioning that maybe is already underway from some of these bigger financial institutions. What do you think
Yeah.
would be your blueprint for decoupling, say, natural capital monetization from, say, some of these legacy debt systems without triggering, systemic risks for sovereigns, I mean, particularly those in the global South?
Um, I think that we're right on the edge, and on the edge you have disaster and you have collapse and you have annihilation, but you also have creation. And the edge of tectonic plates is where all of life is sprung and where all of it is. And at the moment, we have a system where our kind of linear extractive model has not priced in the quantum entangled model that nature actually is and the implications of over extraction. And so, but my underlying message, if it hasn't come across, because it probably hasn't, is that I'm full of unbelievable amount of hope. Not hope, but really high positive energy because um, human beings are the greatest source of natural capital. When we look at natural capital, we think it's plants and forests and everything. It's not. It's
Sure,
us.
sure.
We're the most important. Nature is raw and unfinished. It's our God-given task to elevate it to art, to make it something bigger and better than it is. Okay, that's what we came here to do. That's why we were given consciousness of such a high degree and a mind and the ability to communicate and have languages and all this because we could advance what was already here. But it was only in a symbiotic relationship with nature that we could do that. And there are examples of it. The last piece I wrote on Substack was about the Sotoyama farming systems in Japan. They've been going for hundreds of years, and there's no, you know, there's there's a reason why Tokyo has more Michelin stars than France and America put together because the quality of the produce that comes from a regenerative agricultural system is far superior to everything. They can feed 4 times more in 1 hectare than any of the most efficient American agricultural systems. And a lot of people think that we might have to go back to the dark ages and we'll lose our way of life. But I want to tell everyone that look, your values are safe.
Yeah.
What happens is that we must change our beliefs. Beliefs can change. That's fine. Our values are safe as long as we have food. We've got a roof over our head, and nature yields and gives us at all times whatever we want, whenever we want it. When we look after her, life generates life, and so that means I think in 20 years the S&P will probably look completely different to what it does now. I
In
think
what way?
that I think 80% of the companies in the S&P in 20 years don't exist now.
Hmm.
I think that I think the greatest opportunity at the moment is to not look and see what's in front of us, but to look through corners.
Hmm.
So, for example, say you and I sat here 30 years ago, and we're talking about this thing called data,
Right.
and we're talking about this thing that might come up called social media. And people are getting hand phones now. One day they're going to start connecting, and when they do, we can start to harvest the data, and we see that as the value, the next
I,
value economy.
I
So,
see
of
what you mean.
course, when Zuckerberg makes Facebook, you and I are going to jump on it. And when Uber comes up, of course, we're going to jump on it, and Airbnb, and the guys that got Sequoia and all these guys that got into it, it's not luck.
Right.
They could see through corners. They knew the next source of value in this world, the next asset class that would be the most highly prized was data. We were moving out of oil and into data. And they understood that before the solutions were packaged.
Hmm.
So if we understand nature as much as we can now, we will understand it that when those solutions are packaged, we will understand what they stand for, what they mean, and we can start to invest and we can start to back them. And so there will be hundreds of thousands of AI enhanced young entrepreneurs who will understand that a plant can yield 17 products if it's looked after properly, instead of it being a one commodity crop and a monocrop.
Right.
And that 1 hectare can yield 20 times more revenue if it's farmed in a different way than the way it is right now. And it has all of the advantages of, we have the speed of understanding. We don't have to go to a library or to a university and seek out the knowledge that exists in one book or in one lecturer's head. We have a mobile phone and we have every piece of data and knowledge at our hands at any one time. So the acceleration that we can make towards nature being the asset is so fast. I think that the wealthiest people in the world will be the people that are involved in food and water.
What I mean, I mean, I agree to all of that. I mean, I would ask I would also maybe kind of dig a little deeper and say, like, how would
Yeah.
you, with these strategies, like, how would you propose to enforce legitimacy when things like, I mean, from my understanding, anyway, most sovereigns lack the technical infrastructure to self-certify ecosystem services.
They do. They
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 do.
are they're if we take on personal responsibility
Yeah.
and collective responsibility, and we relinquish our undue codependency on these institutions that we expect so much from. We're in a relationship expecting love from someone we know can't love us. We're in a relationship with governments and with certain agencies and saying, you're going to give us the answer. But implicitly, they can't, because we're the only ones that can. We're in a relationship with someone. I'm the only one that can make me happy. I can't expect you to make me happy. That's my responsibility.
Yeah.
And so I think we put so much onus on these groups of people to do that. And in so we relinquish our own sovereignty and authority to have an impact ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, whilst sovereigns and these big groups are very important, um, I think as with, everything in the only constant in nature is change.
Very true.
Everything is always in a state of vibration. There are
Yeah.
seasons, and I believe that we are on the precipice of the greatest season possible if we collectively take responsibility for understanding that we can have it all. There were two things when I was a kid that I never got. Um, the biggest lies ever. And the first one was money doesn't grow on trees. Right?
That's
That
my
is a
mom used to
lie.
always say that.
Yeah. That's like literally the biggest lie there is. That's the only place money grows. And the second one was literally every leaf in the world is a medicine or has got some form of a drug in it or some form of a food in it. That's why it's a leaf on a tree. That's why it's there. Um, and the second one was you can't have your cake and eat it. What? Why? Why would you have cake and not eat it? See, the thing is, we came here with a birthright of abundance, and it's okay to have it all. In fact, we're meant to have it all,
Yep.
and we're not restricted. We create spreadsheets, and we make farms look like spreadsheets, and we create boxes and these linear models that contain things, but nature, you can't contain nature.
No.
We're not supposed to be contained. We're not captive animals. We're not supposed to live in tower blocks. We're supposed to live in communities. We're supposed to be communal and help each other out. I mean, if you look at coffee in the Arab Peninsula, tea in China and Japan, everyone sits around with one pot and they sit with a small cup, and it's a communal experience and it's a shared experience. And it's when people get around together and they talk and they do everything. And then you go to the other extreme where we are, where you stand with your head down with noise reduction headphones in line, waiting for an 800 calorie frappuccino, which is essentially charcoal water. And we missed the whole point of that sharing exercise.
Right.
We're communal animals. We're tribal. We're a herd, and people come together when there's hardship. You know, you see that in like North Carolina. You see it in America. Whenever there's any form of hardship, communities pull together. People help each other out. It's
Yeah.
our base nature.
But
But we don't need design to realize that.
yeah, no, that's true. It reminds me, and I say this all the time, but like my favorite science communicator was Carl Sagan, Dr. Carl Sagan. And I always like to think about, when Voyager left our solar system, it took a photo of Earth. It pointed back at Earth and took a photo, and it was literally a pale blue dot, as Carl described it. It was this blue pixel among the tapestry of the cosmos. And, he talks about, everything we've ever known is on that pale blue dot. But, one of the things that, as an excerpt of what he said, think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph, they could become momentary masters of a fraction of the dot. And I think about, like, that's really why we're in the problems that we are right now. We are trying to be momentary masters of the fraction. We're fighting for the fraction, but not the whole. And I think a lot of what your work and your writings have, if I were to kind of simmer them down and the most basic of basic things, it really comes back to kind of what you're talking about. It's like this coming together, right? It's obvious that we are in this problem because our ancestors have been fighting for the fraction. But if we fought for the whole, maybe our trajectory would shift, and I know that, some of the writings that you have are very technical in a way of really kind of getting people to understand kind of the financial dynamics. But I do see a way of kind of looking at all of this and saying, hey, look, let's try this. I mean, honestly, several years ago, it was right after that experience in Paris during the Paris Agreement. I couldn't help but notice that people were all coming together from different walks of life, and they were getting on panels and they were talking about things. And then the next year, I remember I went to Morocco for the next conference of parties, and I just couldn't help but notice, but they were all saying the same thing. And I just remember scratching my head saying, well, what did we get done in the last 12 months? And so this is the reason, by the way, this is actually the reason why I started gathering really smart humans to have discussions like this on Necker Island. I mean, we thought, well, what if we just, what if we could lock people in a room and say, let's figure. It's like, when you're a kid and you fight with your siblings, there's like the get along shirt that's big for the two of you, and if you're fighting, you're in the get along shirt until you figure it out. In a way, I feel like sometimes that's what's needed, because we really need to figure out, how do we protect that pale blue dot? How do we protect that pale blue dot? Because from everything that we've seen, and we're very technologically advanced. I mean, we know that there are, thousands and thousands of Earth-like planets out there, but it would take us, millions and millions of light years to get to them. And so as far as we know, this is the best chance we have of doing anything. And I think a lot of what you've said today really resonates with me, and I know a lot of folks that you and I both work with, because we're both kind of like really focused on this particular series of issues. There is a way forward. It's not like, oh, we're talking about all these bad things, which I don't want people to listen to us and say, oh, well, they're just talking about all the bad things that are going to happen. No, there are real tangible actions that are actually taking place right now to make a difference. In lieu of that, what would be some of your, I guess, favorite kind of I don't want to say solutions, but at least ways forward to be the trajectory shift?
First and foremost, I think that I always had this feeling inside me that what I heard and what I saw didn't always line up with how I felt, and there was always this feeling inside me like, I don't think this is right. I think there's more. There's this it's not nagging. It's just, but over time this gets more in charge. And then you get married and you have a family and you go, well, I can't do that. I've got to do this. And we become very, very, we become very top heavy in our decisions and our ways. And we lose our connection to our gut. And our gut and our instinct is, that voice inside, that the first one that responds, the one that we normally always go back to, the first feeling we have, that first millisecond of meeting someone or of seeing something or smelling something, it's always right. And it's like having the courage to follow that inner voice, having the courage to go with that feeling, and to it's not that great right now in the world. So what have we got to lose?
Good point.
We have so much to gain. What is the solution? I would say the solution is to go to somewhere you've never been and get lost for a few days.
That's a good way to do it, yeah.
And leave your phone at home.
Mm-hmm.
I would go off the grid and detach, and I would sit on the ground and I would just be still, and I would listen to what's going on around, and I would try all the things I've never tried before, and I would seek discomfort, and I would hold space for all the different voices that before would have triggered me, and I would investigate and research all these other things and join groups that don't make any sense, but why not? And just expand myself outside of the kind of the gilded cage that I've got myself into, subconsciously sleepwalking into this situation that one day you wake up and you're like, where the hell am I? Like, this doesn't, and it doesn't mean a drastic change.
Yeah.
It really doesn't mean a drastic change. And you don't have to have millions, you don't have to have thousands. It can be the smallest change, because it's always the smallest change that starts the trickle effect.
Agreed.
It only takes one thing. And if one person has that one, it's like the 100 monkey rule, right? If it happens to enough people, it happens for all of us. And the more of us that are pushing consciousness out, the more that it's going to be acceptable. And I would just sit in stillness and scan my body and just try and listen to that inner voice and honor it more and see where it leads me, because it will always look after me, and take myself out of my mind that's been stressed and worried and wakes me up at 2 o'clock in the morning because logically I think I haven't paid a bill, or I can get myself in, you know, get yourself into a state of stress in a dark room, the same as jumping off a bridge on a bungee jump. You know, the mind is the most powerful thing there is, and if we choose to create an alternative reality, that's the one that we'll create. And
Very well said. I couldn't agree more. And I think that is the key. It's just this, sometimes it's like Ferris Bueller once said. He goes, remember at the end of the movie, sometimes you have to stop and look around once in a while. Yeah, because
yeah,
you could miss it.
yeah, totally. When I lived in Hong Kong, I used to get slightly depressed, and well, because I was banking and alcohol and all that sort of stuff. So normally on a Tuesday, I
Yeah.
feel pretty depressed. And so I would have this rule where I would have to take 5 photographs of something beautiful. And in Hong Kong, sometimes that could be quite difficult. It might have been
Yeah.
the symmetry of a road, or it might have been the color of a font on a neon sign or something. But if you go out and you take 5 photos every single day of something beautiful in nature, all of a sudden you change your reticulated activation system, and all of a sudden you're just looking for something that's beautiful.
Right.
Always, if things are going really bad, my standard question to myself is always, what is it about right now that's amazing that I'm not seeing? And then all of a sudden, you're looking for the rays of light in a night of darkness instead of only seeing the darkness.
Yeah.
You can change the way you think, and in that moment, your reality can shift. Your DNA and your cells can move, and you can start to attract different people, and you can start to attract different thoughts. And if you have faith in your inner voice, and your faith in yourself, and your faith that there's a better future, then there will be.
Well, I think that's a great jumping off part, I think that I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's a fair bit of us that probably knows that, but sometimes practice is a little bit harder than some of the actual initial ideas. But look, Matt, I think this would be a good place to kind of pause here, because I feel like our conversations could continue to go on. In fact, I do think this is a good kind of intro into all things Matt Ross and some of the things that you're working on. I think it would be great to maybe our next episode, if you will, we go into deeper onto the actual markets and then really kind of break that down for people, because I think there are things that people have said to me. It's like, oh, it's just a nascent market, right? Nature's a nature. It's like, no, nature's like the oldest market that's ever existed, so it's hardly nascent. But I do think that your insight on these things is a great guide to what are those next steps.
Yeah, just let's just go back to basics, and then look at the value stores. We went from nature, and then we went to gold, and then we went to oil, and then we went to data, and then now we all cycles go back round.
Sure.
And I feel like if nature is the next asset class, and we're talking about it now, like people were talking about data 5 years before Facebook. Can you imagine the opportunities that we're going to be ready to see, and the amount of entrepreneurial advantages that young people are going to have if they start to look at nature like this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Carlos Duarte's paper that was just released about 2 or 3 weeks ago says that seagrass alone is worth $6.4 trillion per year. The question is, how do you unlock it?
Right. I mean, there's 10.3. I think there's 10.3 billion kilograms of coffee fruit that are wasted every year that fall off the trees. And one of the companies I made with it, we were the first company to dehydrate that, give it an HS code, and it's a nootropic, and it lets you and it gives you neuroplasticity. That humans created straight lines and waste. If you find either of those two, you've found an opportunity because there's no such thing. And if we turn coffee grinds into pellets and we burn them, they have more energy than coal and they have no sulfur. So instead of putting them in landfills, we could make logs out of them and burn them instead of burning trees in our houses for warmth and electric. There's just value in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just like you said. If we take one thing away, we'll figure out another way to use it. It's a matter of taking that mental exercise and making it a practice.
Yeah. It's just open the eyes a bit more in the visual field and say, what, yeah, well, maybe what is in there?
Right.
Well, maybe it's not what I think it is, and that's the beginning of the journey. Oh my God, it's so exciting.
Well,
it's so cool.
No, I couldn't agree more. Well, I think speaking of beginning of the journey, I think that's what this is. I think you and I pontificating about these things and pulling in some really great resources is the beginning of a great journey. Matt, I've so enjoyed spending time with you today.
Thanks, man, and thank you for having me for my first interview.
No, I mean, it's great. When we first met, that's what we talked about. We were like, dude, we gotta do this on camera.
I know. I don't know. It's probably one of those things I look back in a few years and go, oh my God, I was so untrained. I was so bad. I was so good. No, I don't know. But this is me right now. This is who I am, and this is how I'm talking. So it's going to change over time.
Absolutely. Well, but it's great. It's great because you are an absolute wealth of knowledge, and it's just a pleasure to always have the ability to call you and talk to you about these things. So thank you.
You too, my man. You too. You always elevate me and my energy whenever I speak to you.
Good. All right. Well, until next time.
Yeah. Until next time. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks. See you, everybody.